We really are pleased to have all of you here today, and we're very fortunate to have a very, very important person in our community address us today. And so for the introductions today, I'm going to turn it over to our Public Policy Council Chair and our board representative from AECOM, and that's Dev Rastogi. So Dev, why don't you take it away?
Thank you so much, Ken, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the North Dallas Chamber's 7th virtual leadership briefing. It's hard to believe that this is our 7th, and as Ken mentioned, I'm Dev Rastogi. I'm proud to serve on the Chamber Board, serve as Public Policy Co-Chair, as well as the Dallas Executive for AECOM, a global professional services firm. And so for those of you who have not joined our leadership briefing series in the past, I just wanted to give a little plug for it, because this is a forum where we bring business leaders and public officials to share the latest issues that are impacting our community. And today we have a really timely program. Dr. Hinojosa is going to speak to us about, I think, what's on many people's minds. What does the school year this year, the 2021 school year, look like? You know, how do we educate during COVID, and then also the upcoming bond election that I know that many of us are curious about. And so we've got a really terrific turnout today. So in the interest of time, we're not going to follow the usual pattern of introducing everybody, but we will leave the line open at the end for virtual networking. We know that many of you have questions for Dr. Hinojosa, so please put them in the chat or send them to Jeff Kittner privately, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. You know, the programs like this are put together through sponsors, and you know, we know Jason, who represents Haynes and Boone. We're thankful for your sponsorship. We're thankful for Nevin Grinnell's sponsorship with DART, and Southwest Airlines, Beth Harbin, who's our former chair, took care of that. And of course, I'm thankful that AECOM is also supporting this program. I'd like to turn it over now to the ISD trustee, Edwin Flores, and a fellow WashU alum. So Edwin, if you would take it away and do the formal introduction for Dr. Hinojosa.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate that. It's always an honor to introduce Dr. Hinojosa. We have served together both in our 1.0 and 2.0 iterations. We were both gone for about three and a half years between our first tenure as superintendent and school board trustee, and now as Hinojosa 2.0, who told us at some point in time that he would work for us for 10 days, 10 months, or 10 years, whichever one we preferred. But we're very grateful for his leadership. The state of Texas is grateful for his leadership. He led the way with HB3 down in Austin. And then also, just last thing, you know, Dallas ISD is kind of the graduate school for future superintendents in Texas. Our most recent grad of our graduate school, Dr. Stephanie Elizalde, becoming the superintendent or the lone finalist for the position in Austin, Texas, Austin ISD. And there are many other all over the state. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Hinojosa.
Thanks, Edwin. That's the nicest things he's ever said about me. So at least y'all got to hear the good stuff. Edwin's been a warrior, and Dustin has been phenomenal on the school board. And so we've made some progress, but we got a long way to go. So I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk the big rocks on the bond and the opening, and then I'll leave time for questions. Well, the bond program is moving. I'm very familiar with the saying that command decisions are easy to make and hard to implement, and consensus decisions are messy. They take a long time, but implementation is much better and deeper because you have a lot of voice in it. Well, and that's kind of precisely what we've done. About 3 years ago, we actually commissioned a long-range facilities master plan. Along with it was a long-range technology plan. And we started working on that in 2017. And as we went through that process, we did an inventory of the condition of every facility, the connectivity availability in town, and all of those things that are related. In the meantime, we have a very dynamic Office of Transformation and Innovation that's gone to many members on this call today. and have helped us come up with some very out of the box, way cool ideas that'll benefit our students, our staff, and our community. Then a 100-member task force was working on this plan starting way back last August, a year ago. So 100 people, they met, they took all the data, they went subcommittees, they came back, and they brought a plan to the board. We've been to the school board 3 times, and we survived all 3 school board meetings, and the plan is mostly still intact. And basically, so what we have to go to the voters today are 3 big, and by the way, last legislative session, the law changed. And there are some key provisions in the law that change is that if it's not campus-based, instructional-based, it has to be a separate proposition. So in the end, we're going to have 5 propositions if the board votes this next week to have it that way. And even though there's not a tax rate increase, the ballot has to say that this is a tax increase, not a tax rate increase, but it's a tax increase. Because if we didn't have this, we could supposedly lower the interest and sinking tax rate. So what's in the bond program? Well, the bond program, the bulk of it, well, the proposal right now is $3.7 billion. The bulk of it, $3.1 billion, is a complete modernization of the school district. Just like our superintendent, a lot of our schools are old and tired. But since I've lost 65 pounds, this new bond program will help all of our schools look a lot nicer. You know, I've been a suburban superintendent 3 times, and every suburb I've been in, all of our schools had irrigation, they had marquees, they had nice entryways, they had nice playgrounds, they had nice equipment. That's not the case. I was a student in Dallas, I was a teacher in Dallas, and I've been a superintendent twice in Dallas, and we still struggle with our HVAC, with our infrastructure, with the appearance of some of our buildings. This impacts property values as well. Well, if you drive by Hillcrest, you drive by South Oak Cliff, and now you drive by Carter, you see the art of the possible. You drive by Edna Row in East Dallas, you see the art of us taking an old tired school, modernize it, and seeing what the big difference that can occur. Not only is that in the program, we also have replacement of 14 schools that we determined were going to be too costly to do an extreme makeover because either their infrastructure systems or the HVAC system, it just made it more efficient to replace those schools with brand new schools. And so we have those on the ballot. In addition, there's a lot of innovation in this bond program. We have Downtown Dallas Inc., which got a grant, got an approval to start a school downtown, and it'll be a K-8 Montessori school, and it'll be just south of City Hall, along with 2 of our other campuses, and where we're going to build a pre-K 12 complex where you can go from pre-K all the way to high school and never leave downtown. And you go across the street to community college and get your associate's degree, and you go down the corner and you go to UNT Dallas and you get your bachelor's and master's degree and never leave downtown. That's part of all of this will be in the bond program. In addition, we're reviving the Midtown project with the great support of the North Dallas Chamber and Texas A&M Commerce. We plan to have a pre-K-12 school there in the Valley View area. Now that they finally tore down Valley View, we can finally start moving forward. Also, UT Southwestern, we have another school where we have plans to build a school near or on the UT Southwestern campus. That'll be a K-8 STEM school. And so that's in the bond program. Also, well, we've made a lot of progress with our P-TECH students, where we have our students that graduate from high school with an associate's degree, partnered with AT&T, partnered with a lot of our industry partners, 77 industry partners. A brainchild of Dr. Flores that we embraced immediately was these career institutes, where we take students that are not in the top 50%, and they may need 3 to 6 college hours, but we're going to have 4 career institutes all over town. One in North Dallas, where the old Walnut Hill School was, one in West Dallas, where Edison is, one in East Dallas, in Pleasant Grove, where Florence All-Male Leadership Academy is, and then we're having a 4th one that is yet to be determined, but we're going to have them spread out all over town, where you can where students can get training in megatronics, they can get training in cybersecurity, they can get training in all kinds of places where you can get a job right now that don't require a degree. We have some great industry partners like Sewell Cadillac and TD Industries that will be training our students. The FCC came down and did a master planning opportunity with us for aviation industry. So we have an aviation pathway that don't require degrees, that our students can get tremendous skills, even as becoming airline mechanics. And of course, we have two great airlines that are housed here in the community if we ever get flying again. So that's the base. And the extreme makeover is we take every school and modernize every campus. That's the biggest bulk of this. We also have some pipeline, because right now, we've been very successful with our transformation and innovation. If you do the all-girls STEAM school at Solar Prep, that was an idea that our staff came up with. Same thing with the City Lab Architecture High School downtown. So we have a placeholder for even more innovation over the next several years, because we don't even know what our proposals are going to be. In fact, we got approached by Apple recently that we were going to do a virtual school where Apple is our partner, and it's 3 days bricks and mortar and 2 days completely virtual. And that's in the incubation period right now to be fleshed out. Where is that building going to be? We don't know. That's why we put a placeholder for things like that in this bond program. Also in the bond program is the Performing Arts Center. The Performing Arts Center is from 1.0, as Dr. Flores described, to 2.0, I saw a transformation in our music programs. When I was here before, I'd go to a high school football game and I'd be totally embarrassed because we had 10 kids in the band. When you go to our high schools now, almost all of our high schools have very robust performing arts opportunities. Yes, Booker T is great, but it only has 1,000 kids. What about the rest of the kids? And so we needed a venue for us, and that's where we presented this through the committee process to the board. And that would be for a site yet to be determined. We also are very much aware, because through this planning process, we found out that there's a lot of master planning going on in Dallas that I had no clue about. If you haven't looked at what Washburn is doing down there by the convention center, if you haven't looked at the Oak Farms master plan in North Oak Cliff, there are so many exciting things that are happening in this community that really most of those projects are still alive despite the situation that we're in right now. So that's in there. We also heard from the community. Initially, in the first iteration of the plan, we weren't going to do anything to our natatoriums, but they're so dated. If you go to Lowe's, or if you go to Pleasant Grove, or you go to the one by Sprague Field, our natatoriums are way obsolete, and we have a lot of community members that actually use those. And that'll have to be a separate ballot according to the law. And then, of course, we also need to modernize some of our stadiums that we've had for a long time. We have regional field houses that need to be modernized. But because of the law, those have to be separate propositions that'll be asked for a vote separately in the proposition. So I'll come back depending on your specific questions about the bond program. The board has to decide next week where we're going. And my recommendation is still that we go forward to make the November ballot. And so that's what's going on there. Let me pivot quickly to the school opening, and then I will come back and entertain your questions. This is, and the North Dallas Chamber knows this all too well. When this year started, this school year, in the 2019-2020 school year, there was not a tornado and there was not a pandemic on my calendar. And somehow we got both. And so a lot of times you really have to learn how to pivot and adjust based upon the circumstances that you inherit. So obviously with the pandemic, when it started hitting 2 days before spring break, we realized that we were onto something that was very unusual. Since we had a long-range technology plan, we started deploying our devices right away, 2 days before spring break. We have one-to-one devices for our secondary students, but then there was a great sense of urgency to get that out. Then we realized that some of them could not connect to broadband. So we started this initiative called Operation Connectivity, which is also in the bond program, to expand broadband to all of our families where they can have access to telemedicine, they can have access to instruction all the time, and access to job. Their families can have access to job applications. And so we discovered that, and then we just started putting things together on the fly. Then part of our master plan was that we were also going to give devices for elementary students, but that wasn't until this next coming year. So we had to accelerate that. And now we were going to give tablets to our pre-K students. I mean, we're going to give Kindles to our pre-K students, but have now determined that tablets are the most appropriate thing to do. Then in the meantime, also, you know, we're 92% economically disadvantaged, and we feed our students 2 meals a day. Well, during this shutdown, we had to deploy food to our students every Thursday, a week's worth of food. So now, as we were going through that process of shutting down, I realized that things were changing so rapidly. We didn't know what we didn't know. So we decided to shut down indefinitely, and it turned out to be for the rest of the year. And now we're trying to plan how we're going to open up. And the board members are mad at me, and they're always chewing me out because I'm learning things on the fly as they change. And we're getting different direction from the county, from the state, and from the feds. And these are not only elected officials, these are appointed officials. A very specific example, when we started our planning, we were told that if you wore a mask and you had a shield and you used plexiglass, you could we could get closer than 6 feet apart. So therefore, we planned our opening to have about 23, 24 students in the classroom. Well, now they're saying, whoops, never mind. Even if you have a mask on, you can't get within 6 feet of each other. So now we've had to go undo all of our planning and now say we can only get 16 or 17 kids in the classroom. And so therefore, we have had to change our protocols. In the meantime, the state has changed their requirements all along about how you get funding. At first, they said if you don't have a building open and offer on-campus instruction, you get no funding. So then they said, oops, wait a minute, the numbers in Dallas County got very bad. So they said, okay, we'll let the superintendent decide. We'll give the superintendent 4 weeks to decide if to do 100% virtual. And then if you don't do it after 4 weeks, then you don't get state any funding. Well, then they amended that, said, okay, now we'll let the board decide to give you 4 more weeks. So now we have 8 weeks. So then after a lot of discussion, we decided to push our start date back from August the 17th, which would have been 2 weeks to after Labor Day on September the 8th. Bottom line, the parents have a choice. You can either do it virtually or you can do it in person. We still plan to try to offer an in-person option. Things are getting better in Dallas County finally, because I think people have now taken this thing seriously. But I'm not a medical doctor, and I have to depend on the medical professionals to give us advice. I have a great working relationship with Dr. Wong and Clay Jenkins, and I meet with them regularly. In fact, now we are meeting as all county superintendents with Clay Jenkins every Wednesday afternoon, along with the medical professionals. Some of the board members want me to come up with a criteria as to when it's going to be safe to have in-person instruction. We're not qualified to do that. And I'm going to beg the board members not to give them a number, because, you know, when you give a number and then you violate that number, now you set up all kinds of litigation opportunities for your organization because you had a number, you went with it, and now you violated that number. And we've seen this change so rapidly that it is something that we just need to depend on the professionals to give us the recommendations. Bottom line, now we've even getting new information. At first, the state said you can't have a hybrid. What is a hybrid? Part in, part out. The reason is a very good reason, because in Texas, there's a law that if you're under 12 years old and you leave your kid at home by themselves, that's child endangerment. So we cannot do that. But now they've come back and said, high schools, you can have a hybrid solution. And at first we were thinking we would just say the parents choose 100% in person or 100% at home. And then you can change your mind under certain conditions. Well, now we have 37 high schools and 5 of those high schools, we have over 2,000 individuals in those schools every day. How in the world are we going to separate 6 feet apart with the most recent interpretation? How are we going to keep people 6 feet apart? If you took Woodrow Wilson High School and put the kids 6 feet apart as they come into the building, they would stretch for 2 miles. So therefore, we have to use multiple entrances. We have to have all these different protocols on how we handle that. So that's just one example of how complex this has become. So we're planning to take to the school board next week that if you want to do 100% virtual, you can. If you want to do in person, you can do in person, and you have to, and 5 days a week for K-8, pre-K-8. But if you get to the second to high school, it may not be every day. And there may be 2 days a week where you come, 1 day where we clean, and 2 days a week where another group of kids come, and then then you learn at home. So we're still evolving and making all those presentations. We were so thankful the board gave us 3 more weeks to get all this planning done and to have this situation of the pandemic hopefully improve significantly. Also, what's happened is a lot of you, I also want to thank Clay Jenkins because we also have our private schools and our charter schools in those weekly conversations. And the private schools have started coming to me, well, what are you going to do about athletics? And so I had a little thread going with the private schools so that we could all at least have some kind of discussions about how we're going to handle these very difficult situations. So we've iterated as we've gone along. I'll tell you this, that the instruction that we had during the shutdown in the spring, I was very proud of our people that put that together, but it's got to be a lot better in the fall than it was in the spring. In the spring, we put it together overnight, and some people flourished, a lot of people struggled. What we do in the fall has to be much better because we don't know how long this could last. And we also know that if you have a case, as you've seen in Georgia, as if you've seen in the Boy Scout camps, have you seen all these spikes, have you seen in Major League Baseball, 2 teams have already shut down just by people being together. We don't know what's going to happen. So we know we got to have a good virtual instruction going on. And I'm very proud that our team and our board is putting together Operation Connectivity for the local area. I'm also on the statewide project, and I'm also involved at the federal level. So I don't want to go to any more details on that. I'd rather now entertain your questions, comments, or concerns, and I think we'll learn as we go along there. So I'll stop right here, and Edwin or Dustin, if y'all want to correct anything I said, go ahead. Y'all always do anyway. But yeah, why don't y'all chime in, and then we'll take questions from.
I was just going to say that there's a 2 chaperone trustee requirement for any speech by the superintendent.
Very much, Dr. Hinojosa. Before we go into questions, I do want to offer Dr. Flores and Trustee Marshall the opportunity, if y'all have anything you want to add on to what Dr. Hinojosa set forth.
I would just add, Jeff, thanks for the opportunity, and thank you, Dr. Hinojosa, for walking through all that. I primarily wanted to just tack on a comment about the bond, which, I've made the same comment multiple times, both to the North Dallas Chamber as well as other nonprofit and civic and business groups that are hearing about the bond. The board will vote in August to add the bond elections to the November ballot. And, knock on wood, I'm fairly confident that will pass the board. But once it becomes official that that's on the ballot, the superintendent and the DISD team can no longer advocate for the passage of that bond because it's illegal to use taxpayer dollars to advocate voters to vote in favor of a bond. Of course, that doesn't apply to trustees since we're volunteers and are not paid by the district. But given that the district can't use its own resources or its chief mouthpiece in Dr. Hinojosa to get out and encourage people to vote, it's even more important that organizations like the Chamber and the businesses that are represented both on the board and in the membership of the Chamber really rally behind the cause to educate voters and get people out to vote. And Dr. Hinojosa mentioned this, but I will tell you, I am highly concerned about some state legislation that passed in the last cycle that requires the first 5 words on the ballot to read in large capital letters, "This is a tax increase." And in reality, this is not a tax increase, but our legislature in all of its wisdom has decided that we must say that, even though it's not true. And I fear that many voters will read that language and then, vote against it or just quit reading and, say no. And so there's a lot of voter education that I think will be required for the successful passage of this bond. And I hope all of you that are on this call will, help us within your own networks to spread the word and to educate people that we need them to pass this bond to help our kids. So that's all I would add. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would,
Thanks, Dustin. Edwin?
sure. I mean, I would add to that, it is going to be all hands on deck type effort. This is a 10-year plan. This is a very long plan, but I think it's something that we desperately need. And, there'll be a lot of phases and there'll be a lot of work involved. I mean, we can certainly afford it within our current interest and sinking fund, collections more than, in fact, we've paid back many of our bonds already early and saved us, our taxpayers, millions of dollars, and we will continue to do so. And then finally, just thank the North Dallas Chamber and all of you who are here on the call who have helped us in the past. And we've passed every bond that Dr. H has been involved with and that Dallas has put before the voters, and we want this to be one more. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Edwin. And Dr. Hinojosa, let me start off the questions with one. Certainly between COVID-19 and the upcoming bond election, there's been a lot happening in the district. And layered into that, you've had several senior leadership departures in the district office. Can you talk about that impact as well as some of the succession planning you have relative to those departures?
Yeah, very good question. And one of the things I am proud of, and Edwin kind of alluded to it, 39 people who have worked with me have become superintendents in the country. And we had the latest one, Stephanie Elizalde, and she deserves it. The superintendent in Round Rock, the superintendent in Grapevine, Colleyville, the superintendent in Midland, the superintendent in Tyler, all of them and many others have worked with me here, most of those here in Dallas, and have become superintendents. So part of that is to build that capacity. This is the strongest team I've ever had in my 26 years superintendent. I've lost 2 other chiefs, but here's the other thing that the board challenged me to do. I failed on my own behalf, but I'm going to start working on that next. But at every division, we created a position of deputy chief. And virtually every time we had a deputy chief. Our deputy chief academic officer has stepped in to be our chief academic officer. Our deputy chief of school leadership is the person I appointed to be our chief of school leadership. Previously, our current chief financial officer was a deputy chief financial officer. When that position became vacant, he stepped in. So we have a good bench and we have good people behind them, like our superstar who had done our early childhood program. He is now a deputy chief in teaching and learning. So we have continued to do that planning. And so we have a lot of people in the pipeline. The one area where I have failed is someone to replace me. I don't get to pick my own replacement. And these guys may not agree, but I still want to work for a long time. And I have 3 rules. As long as I'm healthy, as long as I think I'm doing a good job, and as long as a majority of the board want me to stay. I don't need all 9 of them. I just need 5 of them that want me to stay. In those conditions, I plan, and now that I lost 65 pounds, I'm planning on being around for a while. But if they don't want me, but here's what I'm going to do. Because of that has now become more apparent, is if Dr. Elizalde, for some reason, her contract negotiation falls apart, she's going to be my deputy superintendent. And I'm going to give her teaching and learning and school leadership. But I think she's going to get that job. But if that doesn't happen, then I'm also posting that position, and I'm going to do a nationwide search. And I'm going to, even though I'm 64 years old, I'm going to be 64 years old next month. And I probably can't do this forever. But I probably need to start bringing somebody, because I truly believe and a lot of smart people have come through Dallas. But if you don't know Dallas, I don't know that you can be successful in this job. You see how people who are not from here struggle early on, whether it's the police chief, whether it's the city manager, whatever key position it is. So part of my job is to start getting other people ready for the board to consider whenever I do go. But also the people in Round Rock and in Tyler and in Grapevine and in Austin. When I do go, they know Dallas. So they would have that same opportunity to come back because they've been part of the system and have helped. So the board challenged me with this several years ago, and so I've been slowly putting together pieces so that if someone does depart, I've got people ready, willing, and able to come in and step in at the key times. And a couple of people that I lost, their health was not good. And when you start thinking about people that are over 60 and their health's not good, and now you have COVID, I mean, you get a new lens at how you look at life. And so, but that's why you're supposed to do succession planning. That's why successful corporations do it. Now, I get to pick my team, but I don't get to pick my replacement. That's up to the board.
Thanks very much, Doctor. Next question. Earlier, Trustee Marshall referenced that once this bond is on the ballot, it's been approved by the board, that you won't be in a position to advocate, the district won't be in a position to advocate. The chamber will be taking a position through its Public Policy Council to advocate in favor of this bond election. We did the same thing several years ago when this was presented before. But what are some things that businesses and other leaders can do to help promote the bond election once it's posted to be on the ballot?
Yeah, and there's a movement aboard through not only this group, but especially the Dallas Regional Chamber to put together a political action committee. Now they can advocate, and they're going to have data, and they will be a great resource. And we've already had some very prominent organizations step up and donate some dollars. And so they're, once it's officially called, then that group will be formed. And they've been doing a lot of homework, and they've been preparing. Drexel Wuso from the regional chamber was the co-chair of this, and so now since he's not a part of the district, and he's been there at every meeting over the last year, so he's the conduit. And then that political action committee can raise money, and then they can certainly advocate for this bond program. Also, what you have to watch on bond programs are organized opposition. So far, there's not been organized opposition, although there was one negative letter in editorial to the board, to the newspaper, and it was, by the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And so there are going to be groups that are going to come out, especially since this is the largest proposed bond in the history of Texas. So there will have to be a lot of diligence on this matter going forward if people wanted to proceed.
Thanks very much, Doctor. And last question for me. It looks like we've got a lot of group questions, which we'll get to next. But on the COVID-19 return to school, talk about some of the collaboration that y'all are doing with other districts. I know, for example, our ISD, which is a big part of the city of Dallas, is going back on August 17th, and they're doing virtual learning. And so there is some confusion amongst parents who live in Dallas about why are the districts doing different things. And can you talk about some of that collaboration that you're doing with Dr. Stone and some of the other superintendents?
Yes, Jenny Stone and I have a great relationship, and we talk regularly. We meet regularly, and so we also are part of other groups. Garland, but every district has a little bit different view. Since 92% of our students are economically disadvantaged, there are some circumstances that are different from us than the other county districts. But the overarching reason that we decided to go September 9th instead of August, we could have gone August 17th, but our 8-week window clock would have started, and we would have run out of days that we could use and still get state funding earlier. Richardson is starting then, but 3 weeks, they'll get to that window 3 weeks before we do. And state funding is not guaranteed. And in fact, I asked this question to the commissioner. So if our county health official says it's not safe for us to open, and I agree with that county health official, and we decide not to open in person, we only offer the virtual opportunity, that means we get no state funding. Not state funding, no funding, period. We don't qualify for funding. And he goes, that's correct. So so we just felt, after we talked about it a lot of ways, we decided it's in our best interest to delay till spring break till after Labor Day this year, and to give us more ramp time to see where the issue takes us. Let me also say this. We also collaborate every week. The commissioner's done a great job. He meets with us twice a week for an hour. And then there's a different group that he meets with. Every Thursday morning at 10 a.m., I'm on a conference call with 55 urban superintendents from the entire country. The New York superintendent, the Miami superintendent, the LA, and we sit and plan and talk together about our different circumstances. And none of us, I bet this is my 26th year, I've never faced anything like this. And most of them, none of them have faced anything like this. So we do collaborate with each other, but every district is just slightly different. That's why I felt the need to bring in the privates and the charters, because it was going, at least on these conversations about how we going to open, so at least we're all talking to each other, because we serve the same communities. And even if we disagree, and the Catholic school says, no, we're going now, fine. At least they had access to the same information we had, and then they can make their own decision that was more pertinent to them.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm going to open it up to some questions now. We've got a bunch. I'll do my best to get to everybody. So our first question is from Deb Rastogi from AECOM, our public policy chair. Deb, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Dr. Hinojosa, thank you so much for being here and for your remarks, and for taking care of our kids during this important time. And so I'm curious how you would talk about, you mentioned that the district has done a good job teaching, but how are we assessing that? How are we getting real-time information? And as it seems like you're in this very continuous improvement mode, and how are you going to continue to work on not just getting the kids back in the classroom, but the quality of the education that they're receiving?
Great question. And we really don't know where we are, because if you're an urban child and you don't have access to the same kind of resources of a middle-class family, then the learning loss is going to be bigger for you. Now, we're very fortunate, and I'm not a big fan of the STAR test, but we got to have accountability. And some of my peers are asking the state to do away with the STAR test. That's not me. We got to have data. But more importantly, the board helped us go to a new test called the MAP test. And the MAP test has an opportunity where you do a beginning of the year assessment, a middle of the year of assessment, at the end of the year assessment. And it's not high stakes, but it tells us where the kids are. Well, right before the shutdown, we had the middle of the year assessment. Well, I'm confident that we required our teachers to take 2 grades. Some of them did a lot of direct instruction. Some of them just sent kids videos. So we had mixed results there. But also, when we get our students back, we'll do a beginning of the year assessment. So now we'll know where those gaps are. We will also know which teachers were the most effective during the downtime. And those teachers, we may put them in front of more students to help get caught back up. We also have to be very careful not to lower expectations, because there are some prerequisite learning that you need to get to the next concept to master. And so we have to be able to assess that. So once we get our students back and then we're able to assess them, and now that we have devices, and hopefully now that we have, no one's told me that we won't make my goal of January 1, that we will have broadband connectivity for every student in Dallas. And all of the industry partners have stepped up, and AT&T and others. And so is the city of Dallas has stepped up, and they gave us $10 million of their CARES money to help us on that project. And so if we have the tools and we have the assessment, and then we'll find out, then we have the data, and then we're going to have to differentiate how we support those students. So some families, they flourish, we don't need to hold them back. But the ones that are further behind, then we got to intervene. We have a program that we did this summer. We did some beta testing on it called CAP, Creating Accelerated Performance, where we did a lot of instruction that was virtually for our students that were furthest behind. We'll also have that data to see how much of movement can we have for these students when we don't have access to them. That's one of the main reasons we need to see our kids. We haven't seen them since March. And, there's all kinds of issues that they have gone through. A lot of the, believe it or not, a lot of the child abuse things happen in the home. And our teachers and counselors are the ones that report them. So our board supported us in hiring 57 additional mental health and social work professionals that we are onboarding. So when we see our students, we also got to get caught up on that side of the equation about how ready they are to continue to proceed academically. So we have a myriad of opportunities and plans, and we're just going to have to depend on what the data tells us as to where we have to do triage first and then where we need to just then accelerate.
Thanks, Doctor, and thanks, Deb, for the question. Next question is from Matthew McLeod from Nathan D. Meyer Engineers. Matthew, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. I've got 2 kids who are in DISD, and we're luckily in Dr. Flores' district as well. The question was about if someone tests positive, whether it's a student, a teacher, or janitorial staff. I know it's hard because everyone's going to want to know, and not even if you keep them limited to classrooms, you still have things like buses and out of school or extracurricular activities. So how will that notification be handled? Because you do want to keep their anonymity, but at the same time, with the way this disease spreads, I think people are going to be worried about that.
No doubt about it. And we have another complication called FERPA, Federal Education Privacy Rights Act, that we have to follow. And then there's HIPAA about people's health. So we have to be very careful. However, there are going to be, and the state has told us, get ready for 5-day rolling shutdowns. If we have a case, which we will have a case, unlike the spring where we shut down the whole district, when we had 1,300 cases in Dallas County the whole month of March, what's going to change now is that they're going to expect us to be in contact with those families individually that are affected when we do have a case. Now, they're not going to make us shut down the whole district. They may make us shut down the school, depending on how prevalent it is, or they may, if it's isolated enough and it was a self-contained classroom and it's contained enough, there is a chance that we might be able to keep part of the school open. I don't see how that's possible, but we've been told to get ready for 5 days, to shut down, to clean, to contact, to trace, to test, and then open it back up when it's appropriate. So we have all those protocols built into our playbook. By the way, I also want to thank CBRE, who helped us in our playbook. When we started putting our plans together, they were kind of an external resource that shared their playbook with us to help us organize our work. But yeah, that's how we're going to handle that. And it just depends on how severe and how widespread it is as to what happens next. I'm still shocked at that camp, at YMCA camp in Georgia, that had 300 something kids go to the camp and they did everything right, and yet 250 of them got the virus. So, but they were singing, they were doing things like that, you know, you go to YMCA camp, that's what you do. Well, there's things that we used to do that we can't do anymore. And how we operate, at least until we're in the clear. And there's, and also people have approached us about testing. So I've asked some medical professionals about, so what is the issue with testing? He says, it doesn't matter if it's not timely and it's not reliable, a test doesn't matter. Because if you test and you don't know for 14 days, what are you going to do? And if it's, and one medical professional told me that so far, 30 to 40% of the tests are inaccurate. So until somebody gets a better answer to that, you know, we're just going to have to just follow the protocols that our county health department will have for us.
Thanks very much. Next question is from our former board chair, Ramon Miguez from HDR. Ramon, do you want to unmute and ask your question? It's bond related.
So I'm curious, I know this is early and some might argue that it's the cart or the cart before the horse, since we haven't yet held the election. But I'm assuming that this is an excellent time to issue debt. And I'm wondering what kind of projections are you getting with regards to what your interest rate on the bonds that you're going to issue?
That's a great question, and this is one of the best times to be out in the industry. And in fact, we just sold a significant amount of bonds. That's the last tranche of the 2015 bond, And we came in several basis points under our projection. And also, all of the things that are falling into place could make this very productive. A lot of other places are going to quit building, but if we have this bond, I mean, our construction costs are going to be much more manageable. In fact, even we have 2 projects that the board doesn't know about. They're coming to the board in August that came in under budget. We've had very few come in way under budget recently because of all the construction that's going on in Texas. And then on top of that, our CFO is overly conservative. I mean, we projected a 1 to 2% value growth in the out years when we've had double-digit growth in property values because of all the new construction in the area. So once you take the costs of the bonds, the cost of the construction, and also the property value growth, we're very confident that we can manage this without a tax rate increase. And in fact, we can pay back bonds early if necessary. So right now, all of those factors are looking good for us at this point.
Thanks very much. And thanks, Ramon, for the question. Next question is from Tracy Young. Tracy, how are you?
Hey there. Great. Thank you. Wonderful. Hi there, Mr. Hinojosa. Just had a quick question about students and kind of asking, have you reached out or surveyed students to ask them how they feel, if they feel comfortable with remote learning? Do they want to continue? Do they want to go in person? Just trying to figure out if you're involving them as you're restarting.
Yes, we are having our teachers contact our students. I don't know that we've done a formal survey. What we've discovered from the parents is that, a few months ago, 80% of them wanted to have their students in person, and that's pivoted to 50%. When we started this project with our teachers, 90% of them said they were ready to come back. And as things got worse, that got closer to 50%. What we've seen in the performance of our students, which is not the direct answer to your question, but a related answer, is we've seen a mixed bag. Some students are doing great. They're really enjoying it. They like the freedom. Others, luckily we made contact with 98% of the students, but some of that contact was much more robust and some of it was just compliance, and they were checking in, and the quality of their assignments was mixed. And that's why we've trained all of our teachers on how to use Zoom as an instructional tool, how to use Google Classroom. But now what we got to train them on is how do you teach science on Zoom? And so if a student is taking a science lesson and they're not engaged, they're going to zone out. If you can make it engaging in science, then they're going to be much more committed to say, okay, I'll stick with this because it's engaging. So that's not a direct answer to your question. I probably need to go back and ask my staff is how much direct contact we've had. Let me tell you one thing I'm the most proud of is we've had a phenomenal teen board over the last 3 years. In the past, the teen board, we'd get them together. This was at least 2 students from every high school. And all they did was compliance stuff. And all I did was complain about the food and the HVAC, and I agreed with them on both counts. But now we had them much more involved, like when we had, some issues with a walkout. And then we had some other issues with, so the students got very engaged and they really helped us. And it was much more meaningful the last couple of years. So I'm going to ask my team as to how much contact have we had with students, because I'm sure these board members are going to ask me this next week, so I got to have an answer.
And thanks, Tracy, for raising that good question. Next question is from Lance Curry from Carrington Coleman, and Lance is also the chair of the Educate Dallas board. Lance, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Mr. Hinojosa, for providing this information to us. I had a couple of sort of operational logistics questions. You talked about how about half the parents want to send their kids back in person and half don't at the current moment. Is that uniform across schools, and how do you deal with the fact that maybe some schools, many more parents want to send their kids back, maybe because they need their kids in school for employment and other reasons, whereas other schools you might have different numbers? And then how do you allocate staff to kind of deal with that? And it's sort of a related question is how much freedom will teachers have in choosing whether to come back or not in light of that? Because I think all of those will be challenges you'll have to face.
That's a great question, and we have some indications and we have some complications. The complication is that the parents are required to tell us until August the 25th whether they're choosing an in-person or a virtual solution. However, I beg my staff to go out and get at least preliminary indications, because what you just described is going to happen to us on an iterative basis. And to answer your question specifically, we have some campuses where 80% of the students are going to want to come back. And we're going to have other campuses which a much smaller number are going to have. So we have to then calibrate. The commissioner has told us that we control the district. So if we have 80% of the kids that want to come back to Mockingbird Elementary School, there's no way we can have 80% of the kids in there. So we may have to make assignments as to if they want to in-person instruction, they may have to go to another campus, and that's not going to be very popular. But we have to be safe and we have to follow the protocols. Similarly with teachers, and with teachers, we also have another complication. We can't just put an elementary teacher in front of a chemistry class. So we have certification issues. Luckily, they're subject to our assignment, and if they're not happy with their assignment, they'll make a lot of noise, but it is what it is. We have to operate and we have to execute our plan. So some people are not going to be happy with how we end up doing it. But what's really kind of hamstringing us is that the parents don't even have to tell us till 2 weeks before school starts. And then therefore we may have this plan that we take to until the board, this is how we're going to do it. And we'll have to say, oh, by the way, this is subject to change, because we can only get 17 kids in the classroom safely. And we're going to have to move families elsewhere. That's why for a while we even thought about not bringing high school kids back at all before we were told we couldn't do it. And then moving our elementary kids, our 4th and 5th graders to middle schools, and our middle school kids to high schools, just so they could spread out. But then we ran into that issue of, child endangerment. So we had to throw that plan out and come up with a new plan. So as you can tell, these things iterate on the fly.
Thanks, Doctor. One quick follow-up question from me on that topic is thinking about all these different iterations and some non-traditional learning. For example, my daughter is in DISD. She's doing the Spanish immersion program at Kramer Elementary. And if Kramer ends up, or if the district ends up being all virtual, how will you all offer the Spanish instruction virtually and other things like special education or other things that aren't quite as conducive to online instruction? I know there's a lot to think about, but where are y'all going with all those things?
Yeah, we have certain programs like PTech and our career institutes that require, because they're heavy career tech laden, so they require some space. So that luckily, if a lot of students choose this hybrid instruction at the high school, then we'll be able to spread out and do that. Similarly, the one I'm the most worried about is special ed, because by definition, those are individuals with disabilities, and some of those are medically fragile, and a teacher can't socially distance. They have to be there. And then I have heard some concerns about our dual language program, which is very successful. And I've heard that it wasn't quite as robust as we were shutting down, and we have to have a better solution. We do have people planning for that, and but it's also one of our shining stars that our dual language program has been so successful in the district that it's different type of instruction if it's not in person, and so we have to have a solution. And my team has assured me that we'll have something ready to go, and that's part of the professional development we're doing with our teachers right now as to how you offer that. So those are all very, if you can tell, you have to differentiate for your students depending on the needs and the programs that they're in.
Great. Thank you very much, Doctor. Last question, I think, is from Ken Malcolmson. Ken, you're up.
Oh, gosh, I actually forgot what my question was. So, thank you, Dr. Hinojosa, for being here. And what I wanted to ask was, let me see if I can pull it up here.
It was about FEMA, Ken.
Oh yeah, we were on a call this morning with the mayor, and he sounded very pessimistic about any potential settlement with FEMA regarding the tornado damage. And of course, he referenced DISD in that response. So the question to you, do you feel the same way that he does, or do you have any more optimism than he does?
Not much. One thing we learned from the commissioner, because the commissioner dealt with FEMA all for Hurricane Harvey. And we also share the same attorney that Houston ISD uses. And they told us early on to have low expectations with FEMA. And in fact, Houston, which had all that damage, they still haven't gotten their money from FEMA this many years after the hurricane. Our teams did all the work that they did. You know, we worked with the insurance adjuster. One of the things I'm concerned about, the insurance adjuster was a little bit late. I'm getting some of the things back. So that gave FEMA an excuse to say no. So I'm very disappointed in that. But in the end, we got them the information that they needed. But they said, nope, you didn't reach our criteria, and they didn't give us a reason why. Do I think it was political? Probably not. It's some kind of bureaucrat that's making that decision. But I don't know that I disagree with the mayor that I'm not counting on any of that money, because I've heard how difficult FEMA is to deal with under two different administrations in two different catastrophes. It's just very difficult from what I've heard to deal with them.
Great. Well, with that, Jeff, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and close out this session. First and foremost, we want to thank Dr. Hinojosa. We can't thank you enough. You know, I'm going to have one more shout out today. We have my predecessor, Bruce Bradford, is on the line from New Mexico, who, and he, I'm confident, had multiple leadership briefings with Dr. Hinojosa as well. We can always count on Dr. Hinojosa to be an active part of our chamber and provide us great insights into what's happening within the district. So we can't thank you enough. And as a very small token of our appreciation, the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce will be making a donation in your name to the North Texas Food Bank. And we look forward to the next opportunity to connect. I also want to thank our sponsors again today, AECOM. Thank you, Dev, and thank you for introducing the program today. Thank you to Jason Bloom and Haynes and Boone, Beth Harbin from Southwest Airlines, and Nevin Grinnell from DART. And also, we couldn't end this program without thanking our two trustees, Edwin Flores and Dustin Marshall, for their ongoing public service. And again, thanks to the physically transformed Dr. Hinojosa for his steady and confident leadership during this challenging and uncertain time. So we can't thank you all enough.